At the emergency board meeting, my family said I was just a pretty face. Let the men handle this, my uncle snorted. So I did nothing. Until the auditors called me first. What they found ended the meeting in chaos. I'm a 35-year-old woman, and my family has always been deeply involved in our business, Albright and Company, a successful corporation that's been around for generations. I've been part of it too, but mostly in the background, never really taken seriously by the men in my family, especially my uncle, Clarence, who constantly told me to sit back and let the men handle it. Well, when an emergency board meeting was called because some financial discrepancies were found, I was brushed aside like always. Everyone was acting like they had everything under control. But when the auditors called me in first, no one expected what they uncovered. What followed changed everything for my family, and in the end, it wasn't the men who had the answers. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the email came through. I was in my office, going through financial documents for Albright and Company, when I saw the subject line flash across my inbox: urgent board meeting called, immediate action required. That alone was enough to stir a knot in my stomach. The last time we had a board meeting was almost 6 months ago, and nothing urgent had come up since then. But something about the tone of the message felt different. My father, Theodore Albright, didn't often call for immediate action unless something serious was going on. He'd been in charge of the company for decades, and up until now, his leadership had been steady, though increasingly overshadowed by my uncle Clarence's arrogance. Clarence was the family member who always made the loudest demands. He'd taken it upon himself to be the de facto decision-maker in the family business. From day one, Clarence had made it clear that women, especially me, had no place in the boardroom. His disdain for my presence was palpable. To him, I was nothing more than a pretty face, a decoration to show off at events, someone who could smile for the cameras and attend the occasional gala. I had heard those words countless times. "You're good at what you do, Jules," he'd say, trying to give me a compliment but quickly making sure to emphasize, "but you don't need to worry about the heavy stuff. Leave that to us." And so, I did. But as the email hovered on my screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had worked in the company for over a decade, and even though I'd always been relegated to the back seat, I knew the ins and outs of our operations better than anyone. I had a sharp eye for detail and had quietly been fixing the messes Clarence, Peter, and my father left behind. But none of that mattered. I was never invited to be part of the real decision-making process. I walked into the boardroom just as my father, Clarence, and my cousin Peter were already seated, discussing the latest developments. There was an air of discomfort in the room, and everyone was visibly on edge. No one spoke to me when I entered, and I was quick to take my usual seat at the far end of the table. Clarence, of course, was the first to speak up. His voice boomed across the room, commanding attention even though no one asked for it. "All right, let's get this over with," he said dismissively, flicking through a folder filled with financial reports. "The auditors are coming in tomorrow, and we need to have a plan in place before then." Peter sat quietly, his eyes darting from the papers to my uncle, clearly trying to stay out of the line of fire. My father, Theodore, sat beside him, his face pale and tense. I could tell something was wrong, but no one was saying anything out loud yet. "What's the issue this time?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant even though I knew something wasn't right. Clarence's eyes flicked over to me, then quickly away. "Nothing you need to worry about, Jules. This is men's business." The sting of those words was sharp, but I had grown used to them over the years. It was no longer something that hurt me personally. It was just the way things were. I wanted to push back, to say something, anything, that might make him see me as an equal. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. "All right, let's move on," Clarence continued, oblivious to the tension. "The financial records are a mess, as usual. There's been some discrepancy with our accounts. We need to get ahead of this, especially with the auditors coming tomorrow." I leaned in, trying to catch more details. It wasn't like Clarence to admit to something as serious as this. He was usually the one who covered things up, who swept issues under the rug and made them disappear. The auditors are gonna find it, Peter said, almost too casually, avoiding my gaze. It's just a matter of time before they start looking at the books. My father let out a heavy sigh. I don't know what to do anymore. Everything seems to be falling apart. I wanted to ask more questions. What was going on? Where had the money gone? Why was everyone acting so nervous? But I didn't. I kept quiet, watching them try to figure things out. Then, as the meeting went on, a quiet unease settled in my stomach. Something wasn't adding up, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. There was something they weren't telling me. They were led by a woman named Sarah, and though she was polite, her professional demeanor didn't hide the seriousness of the situation. She and her team began their review by checking the company's financial records. They moved quickly, flipping through files, making notes, and cross-checking transactions. It didn't take long for Sarah to pull me aside. "Ms. Albright," she said, her voice soft but direct, "we've found something that you might want to take a look at. There's been a series of transactions that don't quite match up." I followed her into a small side office, where she showed me a spreadsheet filled with numbers. My eyes immediately went to a large sum of money that had been moved to an offshore account. The name on the account was a shell company, one that I had never heard of before. "Do you recognize this name?" she asked, pointing to the company listed in the transaction. I squinted at the screen. No. I had never seen it before. "Can you explain this?" Sarah asked, her tone shifting just slightly. "These transactions appear to be part of a larger scheme. And they're connected to a lot of missing money." I felt the room close in on me. My breath caught in my throat. I had no idea how this was happening, or why it was happening, but I knew one thing for sure: my family was hiding something. The auditors had finished their preliminary review and had uncovered more than they had expected. There was no denying it anymore. The numbers didn't lie. Clarence, Peter, and my father were visibly shaken when I walked back into the room. They hadn't expected me to be involved in this process, but now it was too late to turn back. "Jules, I don't know what's going on," Peter muttered, looking to me for answers. But I had none. "You knew about this," I said quietly, looking at Clarence. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "This is not what it looks like, Jules. It's complicated." Just what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Complicated? You've been embezzling money from the company, and you're trying to cover it up with your schemes?" The truth was out there, and we couldn't ignore it any longer. Clarence's face turned red. "You don't understand. This is bigger than you think, Jules." But I had already seen enough. I turned to Sarah, who was standing by the door, waiting for my next move. She nodded, silently confirming that I had seen what needed to be seen. "I think the auditors have everything they need," I said, standing up. The power in my voice was surprising even to me. Clarence opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. And then it all came crashing down. The room was eerily silent. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Clarence, usually the loudest and most domineering presence in the room, now sat with his hands clenched tightly in front of him, his knuckles turning white. He was caught, and we all knew it. The auditor, Sarah, remained quiet, standing just behind me, her presence a silent reminder of the magnitude of what we were facing. She had seen it. She knew the full extent of the damage. And now, it seemed, the rest of my family had no choice but to face the reality of it. "You have no idea how bad this is, do you?" I asked, turning back to Clarence, though my words were aimed at the entire room. "This isn't just a mistake or a small error. This is fraud. You've been siphoning off money from the company for months, probably years." Peter, who had remained quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke up. His voice was shaky. This isn't just about the company anymore. This is criminal." I could see the panic in his eyes. It wasn't just that the company was in danger, it was that our whole family was at risk. The weight of what we had all been part of was sinking in, and I don't think any of us were ready for it. My father, Theodore, had been silent up until now. He had been staring down at the table, his face ashen. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass of water, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid inside. The guilt was evident in his eyes, but there was also something else, a deep, unbearable shame. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen," he finally murmured, his voice low, almost broken. "I didn't know it had gone this far. I never thought." Clarence scoffed, interrupting him. "Don't you dare act surprised. You knew. You always knew. You just didn't want to deal with it. And now look where we are." His words were venomous, like poison spilling out from his mouth, and for a moment, I thought I might see my father lash out. But instead, he just looked down again, as though accepting the crushing weight of his own failure. I had always looked up to my father, though I had never quite been able to shake the feeling that he was never fully present in the company. He'd been too focused on keeping up appearances, on maintaining the family legacy, while Clarence ran the show behind the scenes. For years, I had told myself that maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But now, seeing the shock in my father's face, I realized I wasn't wrong. My father had been blind to what was happening under his own roof, and that hurt more than I had ever expected. "I didn't want this to happen," my father whispered, almost to himself, as though trying to convince himself more than anyone else. I thought we could fix it." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was becoming harder to hold back the anger that was bubbling up inside me. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the company. It was about betrayal. It was about my own family turning a blind eye to the truth for years, letting the greed fester until it had infected everything we built. "Fix it?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. "How can you fix this now? How do you fix years of deception?" Peter flinched as I spoke, but Clarence didn't budge. He was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to deflect, still trying to position himself as the one who could make everything go away. "We can work this out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We'll take care of it. We always do. We've always come out on top before, and we'll do it again." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Clarence's arrogance had no limits, even now, when everything was crumbling around us. I turned to Sarah, who was still standing by the door. "What happens now?" I asked, the weight of the situation settling on me more with every passing second. "What happens if we don't do something?" Sarah met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "The auditors are going to need to report this. They have their findings, and they'll pass them along to the authorities. This isn't something we can cover up." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I knew it was inevitable, but hearing it spoken out loud made it all the more real. This wasn't just a business problem. This was a legal issue now. And no amount of spinning or begging was going to make it go away. Clarence, for the first time since the meeting had started, seemed to falter. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out, but there was no escape. The truth had come out, and there was nothing left to hide. "We can't let this happen," Clarence said, his voice tightening as he stood up from his chair. "We can't let them ruin everything we've built." I almost laughed, bitterly. "You've ruined it yourself, Clarence. You've ruined everything." The room fell silent once more. I could feel the heat of the situation pressing in on me from all sides. It wasn't just about my family's reputation anymore. It wasn't even about the company anymore. It was about the consequences we were all going to face, the consequences of everything we had ignored for so long. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. I had stayed silent for years, letting my family treat me like an afterthought. But this was different. This wasn't something I could ignore. This wasn't something I could pretend wasn't happening. And just like that, I realized something important. I wasn't just going to stand by anymore. I wasn't going to let this go. If I had to burn the whole thing down to make things right, then I would. But there was one thing I knew for sure: nothing would be the same after today. The silence in the room stretched on, and it was as if time itself had stopped. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on me, waiting for something. It was as though they were all waiting for me to break, to fall back into my role as the quiet, obedient daughter who had always played along with the family's facade. But something had shifted in me, something I didn't even know was there until now. Clarence was pacing the room, muttering under his breath, clearly agitated. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to come up with some kind of solution, some way to salvage what he thought was his empire. He was used to being in control, used to having everything go his way. And now, the walls were closing in, and I could almost feel the desperation radiating off of him. But I wasn't about to let him manipulate me, not this time. I looked at Sarah, the auditor who had been silent until now. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotion swirling inside me. Sarah didn't hesitate. "We need to file a formal report with the authorities," she said. "This isn't something we can sweep under the rug. The transactions are clear. The money has been funneled through offshore accounts, linked to shell companies. It's all there, in black and white." The words hit me like a slap. There was no running from this now. The family business was done for. The money was gone, and the legal ramifications were inevitable. Even if we somehow managed to keep the authorities from getting involved, the auditors would still have their own processes to follow. There was no escaping the truth now. Clarence stopped pacing and looked at me, his face red with anger. "You think you're so much better than us now, don't you, Jules?" His voice was low, almost venomous. "You think you can just sit there and watch us fall apart? Well, guess what? You're part of this too." I didn't flinch. "I'm not the one who stole from the company, Clarence. I'm not the one who buried my head in the sand and let this happen. You and Peter did that." Peter looked away, his face flushed with shame. It was clear he hadn't been involved directly, but he had turned a blind eye long enough to know what was happening. He hadn't spoken up when it mattered, and now he had to face the consequences too. My father remained silent, his eyes downcast, as though he couldn't bear to look at any of us. He had always been the steady presence in the company, the one everyone turned to for guidance. But now, I realized, he had been complicit in all of it. He had let Clarence take the reins while he focused on other things. Maybe his own guilt had kept him passive, or maybe he was just too tired to fight anymore. Either way, he was just as responsible as the rest of them. I couldn't help but feel a cold anger creeping up inside me. My family had always treated me like I was nothing more than a figurehead, a placeholder in the business, something pretty to display at events and on the rare occasion when they needed someone to smile for the cameras. They never saw my value, never recognized what I brought to the table. But this was different. This wasn't about looking pretty anymore. This was about doing the right thing. "I've been a part of this company for over a decade," I said, my voice firm, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "I've been cleaning up messes, making sure things ran smoothly in the background. But none of that matters when it comes to this. None of it matters when it comes to your greed. This is bigger than all of us." I turned to Sarah. "Do what you need to do. Report this to the authorities. I'm done trying to protect everyone." Sarah nodded. "I'll make sure everything is filed properly." "You're making the right decision, Ms. Albright." Clarence's face twisted in fury. "You think this is over? You think the authorities will let you walk away clean? You don't know what you're doing. You're ruining everything." "Everything was already ruined the moment you decided to steal from your own company," I said, my voice unwavering. "You don't get to play the victim now, Clarence. You've made your bed. Now you'll have to lie in it." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Clarence had always been the one in control, always the one who pulled the strings. But now, it was clear that the control was slipping away from him. His empire, built on deceit, was crumbling in front of him. Peter stood up then, looking at me with a mix of fear and guilt. I didn't know it was this bad, he said quietly. I thought it was just some mistakes in the books. I didn't realize it was this serious. Peter, I said, looking at him with a mixture of pity and frustration. You didn't realize? You didn't notice the money going missing, the discrepancies piling up? You didn't think to ask questions? He swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. He knew the answer, and so did I. He had known, at least on some level. He had chosen to ignore it, to stay in the background and let Clarence run things. Now, he had to face the reality of what he had allowed to happen. Look, I said, taking a deep breath, I'm done playing nice. I'm done pretending like everything's okay. If I have to stand alone on this, I will. But I'm not going to let you drag me down with you. My words seemed to hit him like a punch to the gut. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words. The room was heavy with the weight of the situation. No one was willing to speak. We all knew what was coming next. There was no escaping it. I turned to my father, who had remained quiet throughout the entire conversation. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. Dad, I said softly, are you going to do anything? Or are you just going to sit there and let this all fall apart? He didn't look up. I don't know what to do anymore, he said quietly, his voice breaking. I never thought it would come to this. For the first time, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. But it didn't change the fact that he had let this happen. He had been complicit in everything, even if it was out of inaction or indifference. In the end, it didn't matter. He had failed us all. And now, we had to pay the price. The silence hung in the room, heavy and suffocating, as my father, Clarence, and Peter all sat there, helpless in their own way, their lives and the family business slipping further out of their control with every passing moment. It was clear now that I was no longer the quiet observer I had once been, the one relegated to the sidelines. I had my own sense of justice, and though it might not involve violence or cruelty, it was revenge all the same. In the quiet, subtle ways, the truth could be just as powerful. The truth could destroy them. I glanced at Sarah, who had been standing to the side, watching all of this unfold. She was the calm amidst the storm, the one who had known the truth long before the rest of us did. And now, she was the one who would help finish what had started. I'm done, I said, my voice firm, but calm. There's nothing more to discuss. The auditors will report everything. The authorities will be involved, and there's no way around that. Clarence stood up abruptly, his face red with rage. You think this is over, don't you? You think you can just ruin everything with your little moral high ground. We built this company, we kept it running, your little betrayal isn't going to change that. Betrayal? I shot back, standing up from the chair. You've been betraying us all for years, Clarence. This whole time, you've been pulling the strings, hiding the truth behind your deals and your lies. You've made this business a facade, a house of cards. And now, it's all coming down, piece by piece, because of you. He opened his mouth to shout something else, but I cut him off. I don't need to hear it. None of us do, I said, taking a deep breath. You've always treated me like I was just the pretty face in the room, right? The one who doesn't know what's really going on. Well, guess what? I've been paying attention. I've been here, cleaning up your messes, covering for you, and getting nothing in return. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Clarence's angry expression faltered for a split second, a flicker of guilt flashing across his face before it was quickly masked again. But it's over now, I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. You don't get to control this anymore. You don't get to dictate what happens next. The company, our name, our legacy, everything you built on lies is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I turned away from him, addressing Peter and my father. As for you two, you've let this go on for too long. You've chosen to ignore the truth, to pretend everything was fine, when it wasn't. Well, now you'll face the consequences of that too. Peter looked at me with a mixture of regret and fear in his eyes. He was the one who had always been more passive, who had stayed out of the line of fire. But now, there was no way for him to hide from the mess his father had made, and the mess he had allowed to continue. "You can't fix this anymore, Peter," I said quietly, my gaze softening just slightly. "You can't go back. But maybe, just maybe, you can choose to be better from now on." Peter nodded, a broken look on his face. I never thought it would get this far," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to see the truth." "Well, the truth is here now," I said, a hard edge to my voice. "And there's no running from it." My father's gaze was still downcast, his hands trembling slightly on the table. It hurt me to see him like this, but the hurt was also tempered with a sense of relief. He had always been the one I looked up to, the one I wanted to impress. But now, I saw him for what he was, a man who had let greed and laziness rule his decisions. "Dad," I said, my voice gentler now. "I know you were trying to protect the family, but you can't protect us from this. It's too late for that. But you can choose to do the right thing now. Step aside. Let the company be run by people who are honest and capable. Let's rebuild, from the ground up, without you dragging us down." He didn't respond right away, but I saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of knowing his own failure. For the first time in years, he was finally facing the truth, and it was a truth he couldn't run from. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten." That was all I needed to hear. It was just a matter of days before the auditor's report was sent to the authorities. The investigations were launched, and the truth about what Clarence and his cohorts had done began to spread like wildfire. The media picked up the story, and soon, Albright and Company was no longer the powerhouse it once had been. The family name was tarnished, and the company's reputation was in tatters. But despite the chaos, something shifted. The power dynamics in the company began to change. As expected, Clarence was ousted from his position as CEO. He was publicly humiliated, though he did manage to avoid criminal charges for the most part, thanks to his extensive legal team. But his reputation, along with the company's, was irreparably damaged. My father, Theodore, stepped down voluntarily, acknowledging that his leadership had allowed this to happen. He wasn't forced out, but he knew it was time to pass the torch to someone who would actually lead with integrity. That left me with a choice. I didn't want to take over the company, at least, not in the traditional sense. But I also couldn't let it fall apart completely. There was too much at stake, too much history tied up in Albright and Company for me to just walk away. So, I did what had always been expected of Clarence, but what I knew I could do differently. I took control. But this time, I did it on my own terms. I brought in new leadership, people I trusted, people who knew how to turn things around without the baggage of my family's mistakes. I restructured the company, cleaned up the finances, and started the slow process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were long nights, difficult decisions, and moments where I thought I might not be able to do it. But I kept going, and the company began to thrive again. It wasn't the same as before, and it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had control over my future. As for Clarence, he eventually moved away, disappeared from the public eye, trying to escape the fallout of his actions. Peter, after a few hard lessons, found his own path and started working in a smaller, more humble company, away from the mess of the family business. My father, though not involved in the day-to-day, still made amends with me and offered his help when needed, but we both knew it was my time to take charge. I never became the woman they thought I should be, the quiet, obedient daughter who sat in the corner and smiled. Instead, I became something else, someone who could look at the wreckage of everything we had built, and not only survive it, but rebuild it, brick by brick. In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying them. It wasn't about sinking to their level. It was about taking back control of my life, and in doing so, setting the company, and my family, on a path toward redemption. And that was more satisfying than anything else.